take it away.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you to the Arizona chapter of the IDA for hosting this series. We're excited to be here. And yes, we have Maggie with us on board now at the Department of Ed. Maggie is our dyslexia and literacy intervention specialist. And so we're happy to have her on board. We didn't push her into presenting right away. She just came on board. We just figured out 17 days ago. So we're getting her feet wet. So she is joining me to be my sidekick today. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen today. And well, first, this is the second part in a mini series of sorts that we are doing with the Arizona IDA. And so just the other day, we were able to talk about MOWR legislation and how it connects to the science of reading. And today we're going to dig a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about universal literacy and dyslexia screeners. And because this is kind of geared toward administrators and focus on administrators, we're going to focus on legislation and how it all kind of connects together. So we're going to dig in looking at a few things. Maggie is guarding the chat for me and will let me know if there's something that pops up. And so if you have questions, you will want to have another browser open. We're going to do some surfing of sorts. So be ready. We would like you to travel with us to some of the sites we're going to be visiting. So be prepared for that. So let's get going. There we go. All right, so a couple of things that we're going to go over in our time together. We're going to talk about, as I mentioned, the legislation for early literacy and for dyslexia as it relates to universal literacy and dyslexia screening for that screening portion of the assessment process. We're going to talk about what a universal screener is and what it does. And then we're going to talk about specific vendors and the process in which Arizona defines and determines which tool is most appropriate in Arizona. So that's all we're going to be covering today. All right, so as I mentioned, we're going to keep ourselves grounded in the legislation. We know that legislation is, well, we're going to start there. So make sure you have your browser open and we're going to take a look. So we're starting on the Move On When Reading page. And so Maggie's going to put that link in the chat for us. The Move On When Reading page, we're going to hold for just a moment as everyone navigates there. So once you're there, if you want to put in Bazinga or there or done to let us know that you are ready, we're just going to pause for one moment as everybody gets that into a browser. Thank you, Caitlin and Jennifer. A few more, Dawn and Tana and Julie. Hi, Julie. Thank you, Chris. Okay, as you're still navigating there, it might take you another moment as you continue to navigate there, but we will continue to be on our way. Now, if you were with us on Tuesday, we're going to some of the same places we were because the legislation, while we were talking broadly about it, thank you, Mary and Amanda, we were talking broadly about the entire K-3 legislation on Tuesday. Today, we're specifically talking about the screening portion, the assessment portion. So you should have landed at this page. This is our Move On When Reading landing page. This is where you go to. And so one thing to note, and I did mention this on Tuesday, but for anybody who's new, this section kind of by the outline of Arizona with a bullseye in it, and until that first blue bar, that's kind of where we put updated information. So you'll see that we have the Senate bill, current wording and verbiage from the Senate bills in action there. We had, the assessment updates are a little bit older now. Everybody's kind of finished that. So we'll be pulling that down, but we try to keep that updated with current needs and current information based on the time of year and what's needed. So of course, coming up next will be information regarding literacy plans and such. So that's, oh gosh, sorry, that happened on Tuesday too. My mouse is super sensitive. So that's where you can find up-to-date information. And then again, just like on Tuesday, we're going to address the legislation. And so be sure that you're getting there. We are going to start in the first areas. It's important to note that while we looked at the 3 pieces of legislation last time, today we're only going to be noticing about 2 of those pieces because they're the only 2 that specifically reference universal literacy screeners. So we will take a look at the ones that are pertinent for today's topic. Okay, so we are in 701. That's that first blue bar. When we're speaking of key elements within this legislation, of course, there's the link. You feel free to browse through all of the specific language, but the key elements related to the screening piece is that it's required that we use them. We have to use universal screeners to identify reading struggles. It's in our laws. Additionally, once we've screened and we have some information, the law states that we have to let our parents know. So in 701, it's requiring the use of a screener and it's requiring us to tell parents about it. All right, and then we're going to move to 704. Remember from Tuesday, this was our CIA law, essentially, curriculum instruction and assessment. There are a lot of words on this page. So we did try to summarize or restate some things, but it's jam-packed full of information because it is the CIA law. You know, it talks about curriculum, it talks about instruction, and of course it talks about assessment, and that's what we're talking about today. So you will see specific to screeners, you will see that it's required that a school or district or charter selects and administers a screening, a diagnostic, and a classroom-based assessment. And I'm going to start today just to clarify. Remember, a diagnostic is that next level dig-in, and we're going to see some more information about this. It's that next level dig-in after a universal screener that helps us define specific skills, whether it's phonological awareness, targeted skill, or a phonics targeted skill. Where is the gap? Identifying the gap so we can fill it. It is not the diagnosis of dyslexia or learning disability. All right. And then this is now another caveat with this law. This is what's current law. Please know that there are some modifications potentially coming to some of these. So just kind of sit back and listen. Don't get flustered or anything as we read these, because you'll see that we have already made progress in these. So on or before July 1st, 2020, we had to take care of a dyslexia screening plan. Now, from last week, we know that we already had a robust amount of information dedicated to the science of reading in our legislation. And so we already had solid foundational pieces in place. In 2019, when we added the dyslexia components, we were able to layer those on top. And in a little bit, we're going to see a slide that will show specifically when we're talking about assessment. But in general, the areas that we focus on for students who show characteristics of dyslexia are similar to those very early literacy skills. They're in common. We just know that we have to dig deeper and we have to provide lots and lots of practice and support for those students who are showing those tendencies. And so we did that. We did develop a guide, and I'm going to show you where those are. We developed a guide and we've posted a list of approved screeners. And then you can see the other requirements within 45 days of enrollment or the first day of school. So this has been in place for as long as I can remember, and I've been in education in Arizona for 27 years now. And so that's always been a thing, but we need to screen our students. Specifically when we're doing those literacy screenings, we use one of the approved tools, and we will have our dyslexia screening embedded. Again, notification to parents, that's 2 pieces of legislation now that require that. And then when we're talking about screening for indicators of dyslexia, that it includes the following components. Now you will see that this law says nonsense word repetition. And we're going to see that there's proposed changes in our current bills moving through the legislation to change that to nonsense word fluency. Nonsense word fluency is a different skill and a different requirement than nonsense word repetition. Nonsense word repetition is a task that's usually a part of a larger assessment protocol that's delivered by a highly trained, specialized person who has that explicit training. It doesn't belong in a quick and measure those key indicators of risk. So that would be changed to nonsense word fluency in our legislation that is pending right now in the House and the Senate. And then here you'll see again that those indicators of dyslexia are layered into our assessments. It helps that they're similar in nature in those reading requirements. Again, we're going to see that in a little bit, but it also helps our students. There's no need for us to test them over and over and over again if the pieces are similar in nature and can give us the information we need for both areas. So there we go. Now you'll notice that on the webpage, there are 3 pieces of legislation, and we only talked about 2. And you can feel free to go to the 3rd piece of legislation, but it does not reference the literacy screening assessment at all. Okay, so then as we're moving forward, we need to ask the question, what is a universal literacy and dyslexia screener? I don't even know, it could be that you don't even know what that is, and that's okay. Essentially, an early literacy screener is designed to quickly measure the success and progress of those early literacy skills that have been found by research to impact reading for students over time. So if a student is identified as having one of these key indicators at a particular time of year at a particular grade level and is doing well or not so well, then that is an indication for us that we can intervene early so that there's less, so we have that impact of early intervention. So universal, we kind of breaking down the words. Universal is that it's something we give everyone. Just because we think this student is a good reader or what have you, we provide this to every student, kinder through 3rd. It doesn't matter. Every student, kinder through 3rd, so we can identify if there are any kinds of needs and do that stopgap quicker so that they're less likely to be reading struggles at any level. Of course, if you know anything about intervention and needs for intervention as time goes on, the more a student struggles over time, the wider the trajectory for intervention occurs. So it takes more hours to support a 3rd grade in intervening than it does for a kindergartner to intervene and fix and fill the gap. So it's important. Literacy and dyslexia, we kind of mentioned that, those early literacy components that are easily identifiable and fixable. And there's similarities between what's the required for the literacy element and what's indication of dyslexia struggles as well, or struggles, characteristics of dyslexia. And then the screener, again, it's quick. It doesn't tell us every single thing that we need to know about that student. It's quick, it's efficient, it gets us all on the same page to know if we need to do that next level diagnosis or diagnostic. Think of it as going to the ER. If Maggie and I both go to the ER, but I have appendicitis and she has a broken leg, we're both going to go to the ER, and the first thing that we're going to see is like the triage nurse, right? That person's going to take our temperature, they're going to take our blood pressure, they're going to ask us about medications we're on. There's a whole litany of processes and procedures that happen before they really even ask what's the matter. And so that's kind of what a universal literacy and dyslexia screener does. It's pretty much getting us the lay of the land. And then we can say, all right, this is what we've determined. Yep, you're right. You have appendicitis. You have a bit of a fever. You have pain here on this side. Maggie, you say you have a broken leg. We can see your leg's crooked. So we're going to take you back to the x-ray. For me, they might do, I don't know what they do for appendicitis, but, whatever. They're going to do that next level of diagnostic to figure out what exactly is going on. So for Maggie, they're going to x-ray her leg and they're going to follow up in that manner. They're not going to prescribe her medication that you would use for appendicitis or the flu or anything. That would be silly. that wouldn't work for her. And for me, they're not going to say, oh, we're going to put your leg in a splint. Well, that's not going to help my appendicitis. And so thinking of the universal screener is that first level. It's just telling us who is a red flag that we need to figure out, do a little more detective work to figure out what's going on. Then we can use those diagnostic tools to help us determine what exactly the issue is. And that next question there, is it all we need? We just said no. It's the Universal Literacy and Dyslexia Screener is the first step. We have to dig in deeper to see what's going on. If we simply use, and for those of us who've been around a minute know that DIBELS was big in Arizona for a long time. It's still one of the most common used. But if we only say, well, these are my red students, my green students, and my yellow students, well, red students, they're not all red for the same reason. They're not all in the ER because they have the same thing going on. Some might have some phonological awareness issues. Some might be stuck with a phonics piece or a blending routine or something like that. So the screener just gets everybody tested first and then lets you know who you need to dig in to be a researcher to figure out who has additional issues. Okay. All right. So we're going to watch a couple of short little videos here. And so be patient with me as I flip back and forth through a couple of things, and hopefully I can make this work without too much trouble. Okay, so be sure we are going to watch 3 videos. Maggie, if you'll put the first link in. This page that Maggie is going to put in the chat is actually on our home, is on our MOWR webpage. Let me end this. All right, so are we still viewing my screen here? Yes, perfect. Okay, so if we are on the Move On When Reading page, this is where everybody was, and then we just looked at the 3 pieces of legislation. If we go to our administrators tab over here on the right, and we click on it, this is all the information administrators need. Most of these key blue bars in the middle here are related to the literacy plan, but I'm going to direct your attention to this assessment tab because, of course, that's what we're speaking about today. So if you click on the assessment plan, you will see that there's some information regarding assessment to help you when completing your literacy plan. And if you see right here in this first section, of course, there's 15704 referenced again because legislation is what keeps us all in check, right? Oh, that's what I was going to say earlier. We have the legislation and its job is to keep us in check, but we know based on reading research that everything that the law is asking us to be accountable for is good practice and good things for kids. It's not out of line. What we should be using universal screeners. We should be using diagnostics. So while the law holds us to that accountability piece, it's not out of line with what we should be doing to meet the needs of our students. So that's very important. But anyway, right here, you'll see Move On When Reading assessment requirements. And that's what Maggie has just put in the chat, is this link to here. So we're going to take a look at that. And this is what you should see. Let's see if I can get it all on one page. There we go. And so this little document is an interactive document, and it has each of the key components, screening, diagnostic, and progress monitoring, that should complete or make up your literacy assessment triangle, your cycle. And so we're going to watch a short little video for each one of these. When you click on it, it should automatically open and start for you. But then it always goes to the commercials first, so I have it just started and ready. So let's see if it works. Mary, is there going to, no. Yesterday or the other day it worked fine. I was worried about sound. So let's give it a shot. We're going to talk about screening first.
Move On When Reading assessment requirements, universal literacy screening. What is it? The Universal Literacy Screener is a brief assessment that identifies which students are at benchmark by measuring indicators that are predictive of later reading achievement. How do I use it? All kindergarten through 3rd grade students are given a Universal Literacy Screener in the fall. winter, and spring benchmark periods to determine who appear to be performing at the set grade level benchmark goals. When do I assess? This universal literacy screener is given within 45 days upon entry to the school, and again in winter and spring. How does it fit into the comprehensive assessment cycle? Briefly administered, screening tests provide an indication of which students are at risk for reading difficulties because they are struggling in the development of critical reading skills. Valid and reliable screening tests can help teachers determine the level of need for students below benchmark, including frequency and duration. In Arizona, you can choose a universal literacy screener from the list of approved vendors located on the Arizona Department of Education website. How does this data fit into MOWR when reading requirements? This screening benchmark data are entered into the MOWR when reading literacy assessment data submission portal due October 1st, February 1st, and June 1st.
Okay. Oh, let's just close that so it doesn't cause us stress there. Okay, so that was just a synopsis, a summary of the screening tools. We'll pause for just a moment. Any questions about screening? We're going to watch the other two just to provide information about the whole picture. And maybe well, any questions regarding that screening piece? I don't know. All right. Well, as you're thinking your questions, we're going to go ahead and watch the diagnostic and the progress monitoring. They're not quite what we're talking about today, but I do want you to see them so that you can see how they all work together to get that complete picture of student progress. So let's go ahead and do that. As you have questions, though, please put them in the chat and we'll be sure to address them. All right. Here we go.
MOWR when reading assessment requirements, diagnostic assessments. What is it? Students who have not met benchmark goals will be given a diagnostic assessment to determine the specific areas of need which will drive intervention. How do I use it? Within 2 weeks of any universal literacy screener benchmark period, students not on target will be administered further diagnostic assessments to determine specific skill deficits. This diagnostic data allows for teachers to provide skill-based interventions to small, flexible groups right away. How does it fit into the comprehensive assessment cycle? While a literacy screener tells us who needs intervention, the diagnostic assessment tells us what. It is the gateway to being able to group by skill deficit, which is an essential part of the intervention process. How does this data fit into MOWR when reading requirements? Diagnostic tool information is included in the MOWR when reading literacy plan due to the Arizona Department of Education by October 1st. Additionally, in Arizona, parents are notified of the skill deficiencies and intervention plans in place along with strategies for parents as part of the MOWR when reading and dyslexia requirements.
All right. So that is the diagnostic piece. And I'm hoping that you're bookmarking this page that has the triangle on all of them so that as you meet with your teachers or your coaches or whomever, if there's anybody or principals, if you're supporting principals who just maybe don't understand how all the things work together, you'll have this quick little, simplified version of the bigger pictures to help guide them. So then let's talk about progress monitoring, because it is also an important part of this entire cycle.
MOWR when reading assessment requirements, progress monitoring. What is it? Progress monitoring data informs decisions between benchmark periods. Frequent progress monitoring allows for teachers to close significant gaps in a school year. How do I use it? It's key to select the assessment tool that most closely measures the skill that's been the focus of intervention. Schools will most likely monitor progress using an alternative form of a diagnostic assessment, rather than their universal screener. Why do I need to monitor progress? For all students receiving intervention, this data informs when to exit a student from a particular group, which skill is needed next, and if a child needs another round of intervention in that skill. You can also use this data to celebrate mastery. How does it fit into the comprehensive assessment cycle? Teachers must check their students' understanding often, so a student is not kept in one group too long beyond mastery, nor wait as the student continues to struggle. Progress monitoring data also informs teachers of their effectiveness and when to adjust intervention frequency, duration, and intensity. How does this data fit into Move On when reading requirements? The progress monitoring frequency for students approaching benchmark and the students significantly at risk is entered directly into the Move On when reading literacy plan due October 1st.
Okay, so just some simple information that you can choose to share with those that may not have a bigger grasp of all of the components of the assessment. It's important to note that this process is what's important for as we continue with students who are struggling, that we continue to use the screening process, the diagnostics, and the progress monitoring so that we can have solid data to understand what's been helping and what hasn't, and how we can do those interventions for students. So all of those three components are required in the legislation that we saw. So it's not optional. It's not, oh, I feel like we're not going to do it this year. Nope, it's required, and you need to submit your data 3 times a year. And again, even though it's required by law, it's what our kids need so that we can keep on top of where they're at and how we can help them. So it's super important. So let me just check back into our PowerPoint. All right, so then we watched all 3 of those. And as you have questions, of course, please feel free to load those in the chat for us. Hold on one second as I readjust my screen again. Okay, so we were able to get the big picture of all 3 of those, how they fit, and we were able to see where they were in legislation. And so next we're going to look at what is actually included in each area. We talked about how there was already early literacy legislation in place, and we talked about that. It's combined with, it lists out the early literacy skills and the areas that we're searching for, and then the dyslexia legislation came, and we were able to just blend those together. Think of it as a tapestry. If you are using a loom or you're weaving it together, you have different pieces that come together to create the masterpiece. And so you'll see that the MOWR literacy screening elements, this is what we already had. And so those are all components, the early literacy skills, right? These are what students need to be on track, to be good at reading and do what good readers do. These are what we need. You'll see the connection to those screening indicators that are required as part of the dyslexia legislation. You'll see that there is a lot of similarity. It's just being called out more specifically and more targeted so that we can make sure that we are catching those as well. And you'll see here, we do have it listed as nonsense word fluency. Again, that change is coming in the current legislation, provided it gets signed. But nonsense word fluency is that piece that's more appropriate. Okay. All right, so in the little videos, it was mentioned about universal literacy and dyslexia screener list. Part of the dyslexia legislation that came in 2019, as we mentioned before, was that we had, by 2020, July 1st, 2020, the Department of Ed, my team, had to create a guidance, and we had to approve a list of tools that met the criteria that we just saw on the previous screen, that had those early literacy components and the and the dyslexia components required in legislation. So we have created this list. Now this is a snapshot, so it doesn't show everything. Maggie put the list in the chat, but I will also show you on the website. There, we actually house the list in a couple of places. So I'm back here on the MOWR homepage, and I'm on the Administrator tab, and I'm still in this assessment section. And you will see here it says New Guide for Arizona's K-3 Schools and Districts, because it's under the Universal Literacy and Dyslexia Screener. So this was the guide, and I guess we could take the new off because it's not really new. It's been a year now almost. So that's the guide that was developed. It's very comprehensive. It works through the assessment cycle, and it talks about all of the components. It talks about the parent letters, all of those things that are needed to support students. And then you'll see the next thing, and this is a little tidbit to note. Anything underlined on our website is a hyperlink. So if it's underlined, it links you somewhere. It's not just not underlined for attention. It's actually, it does something. So when we click on that, then you will see the most updated and current version. And I would recommend that when you're sharing this, Janet, great question. I'll get to that in 1 second. When you're sharing this chart, know that it can be updated. We have allowed provision that vendors could submit to us during a window beginning December or by December 1st. So if they get us their information by December 1st, we will review and look at their information to get them on the list by February 1. So February 1, there could be new vendors. What we did is we had to create a request for information, a formalized procurement process that vendors had to share with us what they were doing and if they met the criteria of the law. So every vendor on this list went through a very rigorous process where they had to share with us everything that they were doing. They had to share with us reports. They had to share with us how they were marketing it. You'll see that some of them say Arizona. Let's see. Like Renaissance Learning there toward the bottom, it says Renaissance Star AZ Literacy Assessment. That's because they had to make some tweaks to their assessment to make sure that it met the Arizona standards. So they had to create a new title for that specific product. So these have all been tailored to Arizona law. What we also approved them on was the complete package. So Amira here couldn't submit just for the dyslexia screening. Nope. The law says you need to have all of these. We've married the MOWR law with the dyslexia law. So if you're on this list, you meet all of those criteria. You have all of the early literacy skills and all of those conditions for the dyslexia, looking for the characteristics for dyslexia. So if you choose a product, you need to choose the whole thing. The other thing we often get is, well, can I use one piece of one thing? And similar to Janet, what you're asking is that, are you only doing it with your K-1 students? As I mentioned, no, it's the law requires us to screen kinder through third grade students across all of them. The dyslexia components, the screening for characteristics of dyslexia, only shows up in K-1, but these vendors have already embedded them into their tools. It's not a separate thing. The other thing required in the RFI is that these tools had to be valid and reliable. They had to be field tested. There's a lot of the statistical analysis that they had to do, and their reports reflect that. So if we start picking and choosing, kind of cherry picking different things, that validity and reliability is gone. We can't with accuracy say, this is what we're measuring, because those pieces are diminished. So when you look at the list, it is required that your school district or charter would choose one product and use that to use as the early literacy screener and the screener for characteristics of dyslexia. Okay. So that is where you can find those. I did also want to share before we move on is that when we're here, you will also see it. So again, I'm on the MOWR homepage and I'm on the administrators tab. And then this was the assessment. But if I look over here again to the right, remember we looked for administrators here And then you'll see dyslexia is here. As a side note, the science of reading is also here in case you're interested. But the dyslexia tab is here. And when you click on that, there we go. More information. Maggie will be the moderator of this site as she continues to get her feet wet with processes and procedures, but this will be her page. And you will see here that we have these two, again, anything underlined is a hyperlink. We have them here. This is the Dyslexia Handbook that was already previously created. And then here is that Universal Literacy and Dyslexia Screener Guide, which we created and published last year. And then if you click down into the blue bars, of course, these blue bars all have great information, but then we have that updated screener list here too. So there is where you can find it if you're struggling trying to find the most updated list. Okay. All right, let's get back into the PowerPoint. I hope we're doing all right. I can't really see anybody, so hopefully everybody's breathing okay. All right. Let's see. Sorry, it just takes a second for the slides to get right. Okay. As I mentioned, vendors may submit each year, and then we create a list. So February 1st is our deadline for the team to republish, get everything reviewed and republish a list should anybody, any vendor want to be added to the list. So it's not like a willy-nilly rolling kind of thing. We don't have the bandwidth for that, but vendors have until December 1st to get us the information, and then that gives us 2 months to review it and work through the processes and then get them on a new published list. And they all, again, have to meet the criteria. Oh, there's a little circle. Oh, I guess the circle, good, the circle was there. In each of these, if you're wondering which tool your district or school might want, there are videos here. They're about 30 to 45 minutes long, and essentially each vendor will share the details of their product. So you can find out, like M-Class is an online type of thing. You can find out how it's administered, or, you know, those kinds of things. You can kind of get the gist of the program. We ask them not to be super sales pitchy or anything like that, just to share with us what their product is like. Okay, so we did just mention, I did just show you the Dyslexia Plan, the guide, and the Dyslexia Plan as entered into law in 2019 included that guidance document that I just showed you how to link to, and then also the list of approved universal literacy and dyslexia screeners. And so you'll see here that this is essentially the table of contents of that guide that I showed you that you could find in 2 places. And so you'll be able to kind of get the gist of what's happening. You'll see also here is our definition. Okay. Oh, I wanted to note on this slide also, you'll see that not only does it talk about how, like, the process of assessments, but then it also talks about the parent letters, and that really this is not just following the law, but it's reaching out and incorporating our families into the conversation as well. All right, so for example, if we gave the literacy screener, and we have a student who in kindergarten has some phonological phonemic awareness difficulties. As part of the letter, this little chart is in one of the letters, letter number 2. And so the school could say, yep, mom or dad, your student showed some struggles here. We're going to work on it. And then in the next part, you'll see that there are things that you can do at home, mom, to help out, or dad, or whomever, grandma, that are related to phonological awareness. Now, as administrators in the room, please note that the strategies included on the website, there's a lot of them. That doesn't mean you need to send them all home to parents. That means if we identified on this page when we were doing our screener that phonological awareness was a concern, then we could send home a couple, 1 or 2, this is 4 activities that moms or families could do together moms, dads, families, whomever, could do together to help boost that in addition to what's happening at school. It's not implied that parents are taking on all of this themselves, that this is something they could do. Here's the recognized need for intervention at school. We're going to pull for interventions. We're going to take care of things here as best we can. We also want you to help at home. So administrators, be aware, and maybe I'll just take you there really quickly. I know we're kind of getting close, but when you're here, okay, so I'm going to navigate back to the MOWR homepage, and then I'm going to go to that administrator tab again. You'll see here all of my blue bars, and you'll see here final requirements, parent letter number 2. Or sorry, parent letters. I keep saying number 2. Parent letter number 1 is what goes home by law to every single kinder through 3rd grade student, sharing what MOWR is and what the expectations are. Letter number 2 is sent home at any time a student is struggling. So if you've done your universal screener and done your diagnostic, and then now you have your letters, you can see we have it in English. That's just the letter piece. We have it in English, just the strategies. Remember, that's many pages long. You can pick and choose from it based on that student's need. Or we have something that has them both together if you want to use the whole thing and then delete pieces that aren't relevant. So, and then we also have it in Spanish. So I just wanted to be sure that we addressed that though that was a big confusion when we first published it. Like it was so long. But part of the information in the parent strategies is not, you don't need to send all of those. Send what is relevant to the student's need. Okay, let's get back. We're almost finished with our PowerPoint. We can get into questions. Okie doke. All right. So now what we're going to talk, hold on. I lost my, there it goes. Am I still sharing? Yes. Okay. We talked about this. Okay, so that is, we talked a lot about what was currently in law. And I also mentioned that there are many pieces, there are at least 3, well, there are 3 pieces of legislation in progress right now that are, there's some things happening in the legislature with budget and things like that. And so once they're approved, hopefully everything is passed the way we think we're going. So as I mentioned, the previous law passed in 2019 required a universal literacy and dyslexia screener. Oh my goodness. By July 1st, 2020. We did that. The ADE team did both the screener list and the guidance. So that is there for you. Please do use it. So now what's happening now in that legislation that's in motion is that there is a date change. So the date in the 2019 legislation said that ADE would have a list, and then kind of the implication was that if ADE had our list and our guidance up by July 1, then schools would adopt it that following year. Well, and then COVID craziness happened. The current bills in progress do have a date change. So they would allow until you would have the rest of this school year, or all of the 21-22 school year, to review products for universal literacy and dyslexia screener, to choose one through your procurement process, whatever that is, and then to train your teachers well in using it, and then have it ready to go so that for the 22-23 school year, every school in the state will be using one of the approved literacy screeners. That is the expectation. So this coming school year will be the year to figure out. So an additional year was granted. So as opposed to that happening all last year, an additional year has been granted, provided the legislation passes. And then again, that slight change from nonsense word repetition to nonsense word fluency is there. So that is the big picture. There's some other things with the current legislation, but it doesn't really relate to universal and literacy screeners, Universal Literacy and Dyslexia Screeners. So if you're interested, on that MOWR homepage, there's the links to the correct or the current verbiage of those bills. Remember that the verbiage in the bills can change almost daily sometimes, so be aware of that. All right. We'll be sure to put any questions. I see some of you are getting there. We'll be sure to get there in just a second. This is what we covered today. So we'll be interested to hear how that helped or solidified. And then here is, we'll leave this as we do our Q&A section as our contact information for Maggie and I. So please do reach out at any time. All right, what kind of questions do we have?
All right, well, let's see. We had a question, Catty. Is there an updated list for appropriate interventions, tier 2, tier 3?
We do not have intervention lists at this moment. We do have a vetted list of products that may be helpful, but we haven't gone that far yet.
Okay. Diane has a question. My school psych is under the impression that we cannot label a child as dyslexic. Will the new MOWR legislation change that? What kind of language should we use with parents as we talk about students who show signs of dyslexia and are in intervention based on dyslexia screening?
So I think there are a couple of things here, Diane. First is, I wonder who we is, right? So if we're talking about classroom teachers, absolutely not. You don't have, the testing information, nor are many of us, I'm not even trained on how to deliver those assessment tools. It's a specialized person who can identify a learning disability and identify it as dyslexia. So as a teacher who's going through the universal screening and diagnostic, not diagnosing, but diagnostic, digging into those skills, teachers do that. And really at this early age, they're reading struggles. And so if we've gone through that triangle, we've done our screener, we've done our diagnostic, and then we've done progress monitoring, and then we adjusted our progress monitoring for intensity, duration, and frequency, and we've done that a couple of times, then there's a whole different process that would move students from intervention tier, so their core program, so small groups during your core, an intervention time, tier 1 or tier 2, and then additional intervention time, tier 3, which some don't consider that special education, but in places I've been, that was two different things. It was almost tier 4 with special education. So there is that process within a school that shifts from classroom and interventionist-based intervention, where we need to move to that ESS process, where we're doing that real diagnosis kind of thing. And it may not be the school psychologist. It may have to go outside. Those are ESS processes that we would rely on our ESS team for that kind of thing. But when we're talking about classroom-based instruction and intervention, that's all within us. That screener, the diagnostic that digs into the skills. Think of like 95% group has a phonics screener. Most core programs have phonics screeners or phonological awareness screeners that can help you identify what that targeted skill is. It's not a specialized assessment that only some people have access to. It's usually a part of a core program, or you can buy it from a vendor pretty readily. You don't need special training to deliver it. And then that progress monitoring piece. Those are all classroom-based instruction pieces that could be used. So when you're communicating with parents, you can talk about reading struggles. You can say that, because even at kinder and first, some of those indicators, they may or may not be dyslexia, right? They could be a reading struggle, and that student just has a reading struggle in that area. Now, left unchanged and no progress, no intervention, maybe it is. But at that early intervention, we're going to do whatever we can in the classroom and with our intervention processes to fill those gaps to make certain that it's not. Okay, hopefully that helped, Diane.
All right. And keep coming with the questions. So we have one from Dawn. We are already using an approved screener. And do we have to go through the procurement process again? So if they're already using an approved screener, do they have to go through it again?
So not necessarily. What I would recommend, Dawn, is that you make certain that your product is the one on the list. So you can reach out to your vendor and say, hey, I understand, like if we think about the STAR, the Renaissance STAR tool, theirs is Arizona specific. And I've actually heard of a couple instances now where the vendors are not sharing the Arizona specific one. And we're going to reach out to all the vendors to make sure that they're doing that. But you'll need to just reach out to them and say, listen, I know that there are some vendors that you're on Arizona's approved list. Is the product I'm using the approved product? Because some of them do have slight variations. If you are, then great. If they say, oh, you know what, you're using a different product or whatever, they should update you at little to no cost. So if it's not the correct version or whatever, just reach out to them and see what they can do for you.
Okay, so Diane wanted to have a little bit more clarity in the language that they're supposed to use because the legislation is rolling out and it is saying things about dyslexia. And what if parents ask? She just wanted a little bit more clarification and like.
Sure. And so I think it's that consistency in messaging that while they are they're indicators of reading struggles, that could also be characteristics of dyslexia, not dyslexia itself. There needs to be more, an even deeper diagnosis to figure that out. And it would take time. If the student is showing progress and improvement with the interventions, then great, and that's the whole point of all of the MOWR legislation and the dyslexia legislation, that we can intervene early and support those students. So it's just a matter of keeping that clear. The ESS team is actually on top of this already at the state level, knowing that there's going to be some confusions, and we're going to do our best to communicate it as best we can, keep information on our website and providing it in settings like this to administrators and people so that they understand those differences. But the ESS team we're working on an FAQ kind of document as well, so that we have lots of information to provide. The questions are great though. Thank you.
So I think we're about caught up with our questions that we have in the chat group. I know this really doesn't go along with what the screening process, but do you know what kind of interventions, or is that going to be left up to the schools?
Yeah, that's a very school-driven choice. They can choose what kind of interventions. What we did do is vet a list of interventions, not based on whether they're good, bad, or ugly, but mostly did they meet the criteria of the legislation. In Arizona, the only criteria for using an intervention tool is that it has ESSA evidence. And so we do have a list. I'll share just real quick in case anybody's interested. On, again, the MOWR homepage, hopefully you're still there, in that administrators tab, you'll see that we have core reading criteria. And so that's your tier 1 instruction. There's a bunch of information here. And then we listed, there's a button there that will take you to a vetted list. Core reading, that tier 1 has 3 criteria. It has to meet standards. It has to teach the essential elements of reading, which in Arizona is the big 5+3, oral language, handwriting, and spelling. And then it also has to meet the ESSA criteria. But if I go back to that administrator tab, so that's the core piece, but then we'll see the intervention guidance. And we have some information about ESSA and that kind of thing. And then right down here, you'll see another button that says Interventionless. And we did the same sort of thing, except intervention, the only criteria instead of the 3 like for core, there's only 1 criteria, and that is that it meets the ESSA rating level, top 3 tiers. And so you can see that here, and that's why these are green. So maybe that's helpful. I'm not sure.
Yes. All right. We did get another question. Julie asks, can you please clarify, so the screeners are not required until 2022, but we can pilot them this year?
Okay, great question, Julie. So you should actually already have screeners in place. So you can continue to use your previously selected screeners, but you may use this year to choose one from the list if what you're currently using is not on the list. So it's kind of yes for both of what you're saying, but you should already still have screeners in place. You still have to report data this year. So it's whatever screener you have in place and then making a selection from the list.
And is that if only the legislation gets passed, or?
No, the law has been in place since approximately 2006 that you had to screen students.
Oh, yeah.
That's the MOWR legislation. So you should already have screeners in place for fall, winter, and spring screening data for kinder through third grade. So the only addition was those dyslexia screening components in kinder and first. And so you have this whole next year to pilot any one of these if you're not already using it, or if what you're using isn't the latest version, kind of thing. Does that make sense, Julie?
She says, thank you.
Okay.
Once again, I think that's the last of the questions. We'll wait just 1 minute, I think. And actually, oh, she says yes too.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Pick this up again in case anybody needs to reach out to us, or if you don't catch it, we're working with Mary from Arizona IDA, and we're going to send out the slides so that you have them. But just in case you need it, our contact information is here. We're happy to help whenever you need it. So be sure to take that down.
Okay, guys, I think we are about done for today. Don't